The enemy had no name that translated cleanly. Across 100 civilizations, they were called 1,000 things, the devourers, the swarm, the inevitable. But the meaning was always the same. When they came, you did not fight. You did not resist. You burned your own records, silenced your distress beacons, and prayed they passed quickly. They had crushed empires older than Earth's continents. They reduced fleets the size of small moons to glowing debris fields in the silence of space. Resistance was not foolish, it was meaningless, because against them there was no such thing as victory. And yet one day, a warship stood in their path. Why? Why would any creature choose to face the storm when even the stars themselves seemed to dim in its presence? The alien commanders could not understand it. Their scouts reported a single vessel, human in origin, from older battles. Its power signature was laughable, its weapons archaic. By every measure, it was dust before the hurricane. But the humans had not moved aside. The alien armada paused. For the first time in countless conquests, they hesitated, not from fear, but from confusion. The galaxy had long since learned obedience. Yet here was a species too young, too small, too fragile, daring to place themselves in the way of inevitability. Inside that human vessel silence held. The crew knew the odds. They had seen the data, the countless planets erased, the survivors fleeing like shadows in the night. They had heard the last transmissions of allies begging for help that never came. Every soul aboard knew what waited. And still they stayed. Because humans are a strange thing. They do not measure victory only by survival. They do not accept inevitability as truth. Even at the edge of despair, they cling to something alien minds cannot name: hope. The captain, scar across his jaw, stood at the forward viewport, watching the darkness ripple with the first signs of the approaching horde. His crew waited for his order, though every instinct screamed to flee. He gave them none. Instead, he whispered words not meant for strategy, but for the soul. They'll expect us to beg, to surrender, to vanish. We won't. We'll make them remember us. Even if this is the end, we'll make them afraid. The aliens watched. They waited for retreat, but the human vessel did not move, its weapons primed, its shields hummed, a single light in the endless dark. And in that moment, something impossible happened. For the first time in their endless march across the stars, the enemy wondered, not about numbers or tactics or power, but about meaning. Why did this fragile species stand when all others bent the knee? Why did they smile at the storm? The alien fleet advanced. The void trembled. The human ship, small, insignificant, held its ground. And though no signal escaped the walls of that vessel, though no alien could hear the heartbeat of those aboard, the universe itself seemed to lean closer. Because sometimes the smallest stand echoes the loudest. Because sometimes inevitability is an illusion. And because sometimes, against all reason, against all fear, humanity chooses defiance. The first shots came not from the humans. No, the swarm would never permit such an insult. The void itself seemed to ripple as alien weapons tore open the silence, energy so vast it could split a planet's mantle. Beams like rivers of lightning streaked across the black, converging on the single human vessel. And still it held. The shields screamed, metal groaned. The bridge shook as though the hand of a god had struck it, yet the ship did not break. Lights flickered, consoles sparked. A crewman spat blood from a bitten tongue and laughed through the pain. The aliens watched, waiting for the debris cloud, for the flash of atmosphere and fire. But there was none. The human ship endured. Why? How? This was not possible. No other species had withstood a first strike. Entire armadas had been annihilated before their weapons could lock. Yet this single vessel absorbed it staggered, yes, it bled, yes, but it lived. The alien commanders debated in frequencies no human ear could hear. Was it new technology? Some trick of physics? A desperate bluff? The swarm had devoured science older than suns. Nothing should have withstood their fury. And still the humans smiled. The captain's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Calm, certain. He did not bark orders, he whispered them as though he already knew the shape of the battle yet to unfold. Return fire. The humans answered. Weapons older than the swarm itself, crude by galactic standards, lit the void. Kinetic slugs, nuclear fire, beams barely strong enough to scar an enemy hull. Against the swarm, they were gnats biting a giant. But the shots struck true. Not enough to destroy, not enough to cripple, but enough to remind. The swarm had forgotten pain. It had forgotten resistance. It had forgotten that even the smallest ember can still burn. And suddenly, the impossible thought entered their hive mind. We are not invincible. Inside the human vessel, every soul felt it. Fear, yes. Terror, yes. But also something else. Something the captain had sparked in them, something that burned hotter than survival instinct, purpose. They were not here to win, they knew that. They were here to teach. The ensign at the tactical station, barely 25, hands shaking, whispered words under her breath that no alien could ever comprehend. Let them come, let them see what it means to fight us. And so they did. Wave after wave of alien fire poured into the human ship. Hull plates peeled back like paper. Air hissed into the void. Lives were snuffed out in silence. Yet for every crew member lost, another screamed defiance, carried their station, fired their weapons until their hands blistered. The swarm had never faced this. Other species begged, others fled, others died in silence. But the humans, they sang. Not with voices, but with action. With every torpedo launched, every slug fired, every system patched with bare hands in burning corridors. It was madness. It was suicide. It was beautiful. The alien armada, vast enough to blot out constellations, slowed. Not from damage, not from fear, but from the creeping realization that something was wrong. For the first time conquest did not feel inevitable. The humans were not stronger, they were not smarter, they were not older. But they were something else. Something the swarm had no word for. On the bridge, the captain leaned forward, hand resting on the cracked railing. His crew turned to him, waiting for the words that had carried them this far. He gave them none. He simply met their eyes one by one, as if to say, "We do this together." And in that silence, the crew understood. They were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to be remembered. To carve their defiance into the memory of the universe so that even if the swarm devoured them, it would never again sleep soundly. The captain finally spoke, voice steady, almost gentle. They think we're broken. Show them what broken means when you're human. The ship roared back to life. Engines bled fire, weapons blazed, and for every scar the swarm dealt, the humans answered. The aliens could not process it. This was not war. This was something else, something dangerous, something contagious. Because the galaxy was watching. Hidden colonies, scattered refugees, crushed civilizations that had long since lost hope, all eyes turned to the single human ship standing where none should stand. And in the silence of distant systems, a question began to rise. If they can stand, why can't we? The swarm felt it, the ripple, the shift, the spark in the darkness. And for the first time, the destroyers of worlds knew what it was to doubt. The battle raged on, metal screamed, flesh burned, stars bore witness. And through it all, the humans endured. Because surrender was not in their nature. Because inevitability was a lie. And because sometimes, one ship is enough. The hull was burning. The smell of scorched metal, fried circuitry, and human blood clung to every breath that filled the failing ship. They should have been dead by now. By every chart, every analysis, every precedent across the stars, the human vessel should have been ash in the void. And yet it fought still. But the cost was mounting. Another section vented to space. Dozens gone in silence, their names flashing red on the bridge consoles. Medics stumbled over smoke-filled corridors, dragging the wounded with bare hands because the stretchers had long since burned. Every deck was breaking apart piece by piece. And still, no one abandoned their post. Why? The swarm could not fathom it. They had seen fear before. They had seen courage twisted into desperation. They had seen defiance shatter beneath overwhelming power. But this was different. The humans did not fight for victory. They fought for something unseen, something the swarm could not strip away with weapons or fire. In the bridge's failing light, the captain wiped blood from his brow. His hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He leaned heavily on the railing, his eyes fixed on the storm of alien vessels. "How many left?" he asked quietly. The ensign at tactical swallowed hard, voice raw. "Enough, sir, for one more volley." The captain smiled faintly. "Then we're rich." The crew laughed, even as tears streaked down their faces. Even as death loomed outside every viewport. They laughed because that was what humans did, find humor in despair, courage in absurdity. The swarm observed this and recoiled, not from the laughter itself, but from what it meant. Laughter here, in the face of annihilation, it was not madness, it was defiance distilled to its form. The swarm had no word for such a thing. Another impact tore through the ship, consoles exploded. A voice cried out in agony, then fell silent. Smoke choked the air. The ship listed, alarms wailing like the screams of the dying. The captain gripped the railing, knuckles white, and steadied his voice. "They want us gone. Let's make sure they earn it." The order was given. Weapons fired again. Weak, scattered, nothing compared to the endless fury of the swarm, yet every shot carried weight beyond its metal. Each slug, each missile, each beam was a message burned into the void. We are still here. The aliens felt something they had never known. Pressure, not from weapons, but from the humans' refusal to vanish. Their collective mind rippled with unease. Victory was certain, but certainty no longer brought comfort. On the human ship, a young engineer crawled through a half-collapsed corridor, dragging power conduits together with hands blistered raw. Sparks bit into his skin, blood mingled with smoke, but he laughed softly, whispering to himself. "Not today, not yet." He slammed the lines together, and across the ship, lights flickered back to life. Weapons recharged, engines hummed. For one more moment, the ship endured. And when the swarm realized it, unease deepened into something far more dangerous: fear. Because humans refused to break. Even as one by one, lives were lost. Even as the ship bled itself dry. Even as the inevitable bore down upon them. They stood. The captain turned to his crew, eyes weary, but burning with something no weapon could kill. "They think this is the end, but for us, this is the beginning." The crew nodded. Some whispered prayers. Others tightened grips on controls slick with sweat and blood. All of them prepared to die, not in silence, not in surrender, but in fire. And in that moment, something shifted. Across the galaxy, hidden listeners, refugees, survivors, broken remnants of civilizations swallowed by the swarm, heard whispers of this battle, heard of the human ship that would not yield. And for the first time in countless years, hope stirred. Not because they believed the humans would win, but because they realized the swarm could bleed. The aliens felt it too. Their hive mind, once unshakable, now fractured with questions. If one ship could resist, what of a fleet? What of 1,000? What if the galaxy remembered what it had forgotten, that inevitability was never truth, only fear wearing armor? The swarm fired again. The human vessel shuddered, its hull splitting wider. Fires raged unchecked. The screams of the dying echoed through every corridor. But still one ship stood. Still one ship fought. And still one ship carried the unbearable, unexplainable, unstoppable burden of being human. Because to be human is not to win every battle. It is to rise even when defeat is certain. It is to fight, not because you believe you will live, but because you know some things must never be surrendered. The aliens had crushed worlds without effort. They had made gods kneel, burned stars to cinders, drowned galaxies in silence. But they had never faced this. One warship, broken, bleeding, laughing through its pain. A crew who knew death was inevitable, and yet still whispered to the void. "Not today." And for the first time in their endless conquest, the swarm hesitated. The swarm had no leaders. No kings, no admirals, no councils. They were one mind stretched across 1 billion bodies, perfect in unity, flawless in purpose. Their will was singular, their judgment beyond error. And yet, in the shadow of a single human vessel, cracks formed in that perfect mirror. Why did the humans still fight? The swarm had asked the question 1,000 times in unison. Each answer dissolved into silence. Power explained nothing. Logic offered no reason. Instinct failed them. A species should break when faced with annihilation. It should collapse into despair, seek surrender, or die in terror. That was the way of the galaxy. That was the law of survival. But humans obeyed no such law. Inside their ship, death walked freely now, bulkheads torn open, fires uncontained. The wounded stacked in corridors, their breaths shallow, their voices fatting. Still, they did not beg for mercy. One by one, as they slipped into silence, they passed messages along. Notes scrawled in blood, tokens pressed into a friend's hand, a name whispered to be remembered. The swarm listened, trying to understand. What was this? These humans left memories behind as if memories themselves were weapons. They fought not only with guns, but with something the swarm had no concept of: legacy. On the bridge, the captain stood tall, though exhaustion weighed on him like iron. His uniform was torn, blood crusted across his side, but his voice did not waver. "Report." The navigator, coughing through smoke, managed a grim smile. "Engines down to 30%, sir. Weapons 20. Hull integrity, you don't want the number." The captain chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Still breathing, then?" "Yes, sir." They shared a look, battered, broken, but unyielding. The swarm saw this exchange and recoiled. For them, command was function, obedience automatic. There was no bond, no trust, no loyalty, only unity. But the humans, they carried something stronger than unity. They carried choice. Each crew member could leave, each could give up, yet none did. Their defiance was not instinct, not programming, not command, it was will. The hive mind trembled. Will was dangerous, will was unpredictable, will could spread. And already whispers had begun to stir across the galaxy. Hidden enclaves, shattered remnants of once great empires, heard tales of this single ship. Tales of humans standing where all others had fallen. Tales of defiance carried on stolen signals and desperate voices. For the first time, the swarm's inevitability faltered. The battle pressed on. The aliens unleashed fury enough to carve canyons in planets. The human ship buckled, screamed, bled, yet when the smoke cleared, it was still there. Not whole, not strong, but there. Inside, the cost was unbearable. A young medic, hands shaking, pressed torn fabric into a wound that refused to close. The soldier before him smiled weakly, teeth red with blood. "Save it," the soldier whispered. "You'll need it for someone who can still fight." The medic's eyes filled with tears. "I can't." "You can," the soldier rasped. His last breath came as a laugh. "You're human, you can." And then he was gone. The medic screamed, not in despair, but in rage. He rose, stumbled back to his station, and kept working, because even in death, the soldier's words lived. The swarm could not understand this. To them, death was the end of function, nothing more. But the humans turned death itself into fuel, into fire, into something that spread, burning brighter in those left behind. The captain felt it too, every loss carved into him, every silence a wound. But he did not falter. He carried each death like a weapon, like ammunition to hurl back into the void. His voice carried through the ship, ragged but unbreakable. "They think we're finished. They think we're weak. But let them come, because every shot they fire, every soul they take, only makes us stronger." The crew roared in answer, voices hoarse, faces streaked with ash and tears. For a moment their ship did not feel broken. It felt alive. The swarm hesitated, not from damage, not from threat, but from the weight of something it had no name for. Was this what fear was? A single thought flickered across their hive mind, unbidden, unwelcome. What if we cannot kill them? Not their bodies, they were flesh, fragile, finite. But what if killing their bodies was never enough? What if humans fought with something beyond the reach of weapons? The hive recoiled from the thought, trying to crush it. But once a thought is born, it cannot be thought. And in that moment, inevitability cracked. The captain turned his gaze toward the endless swarm filling the stars, and for the first time his voice was not for his crew. It was for the enemy. "You wanted a lesson," he whispered into the void. "Here it is, humanity doesn't break. Even if you kill us all, you'll never win." The words carried no sound across the gulf of space, but the swarm heard them all the same. And for the first time in their eternal march, the destroyers of worlds felt small. The human ship was dying. It had been dying since the first shot struck, and yet it lived still. Now its decks were gutted steel, its engines bleeding plasma into the void, its crew fighting in the shadow of inevitable collapse. But they did not stop. Every strike the swarm unleashed was answered with fire. Every scream was met with defiance, and though their numbers thinned, their voices grew louder. It was then the captain made the hardest decision of the war. The swarm was moving to surround them, an ocean of living ships folding in from every direction. Their weapons would converge in one final obliterating wave. Nothing could stand against it. Nothing could survive. Unless someone bought time. The order came quietly, spoken not with authority but with sorrow. Power to the forward batteries, overload sequence, manual trigger. The crew froze. They knew what that meant. Someone had to stay. Someone had to hold the line until the overload ignited, one soul to burn so that the rest could fight another moment longer. Silence filled the bridge. No one dared breathe. Then from the shadows of the command deck, a voice spoke, calm, steady. "I'll do it." It was Commander Hale, the captain's oldest friend, his second in command, the man who had stood beside him since the first battle of their youth. His eyes were tired but unflinching. The captain's jaw tightened. "No." "Yes," Hale stepped forward, voice like iron. "Don't waste time, we need this." The crew turned toward him, tears welling. No one questioned, no one argued, they knew. Hale clasped the captain's shoulder, squeezing with the bond of decades. "You'll need to finish this. They'll follow you, not me. My place is here." The captain's lips trembled, though his voice did not. "You don't have to." "Of course I do," Hale said softly. Then with a faint smile, "We're human, that's what we do." No words could answer that. The captain only nodded, eyes burning, and stepped aside. Hale turned to the crew. "Make it count, make me count." They saluted him, not with protocol, not with ceremony, but with tears in their eyes and defiance in their hearts. Then they left, each carrying the weight of what he had chosen. The corridors shook as the swarm pressed closer. Hale walked alone, boots crunching against shattered glass and fallen steel, toward the forward battery. His hands trailed along the walls from battle, as though he were saying goodbye to an old friend. At the console, sparks danced. Systems screamed. He keyed in the sequence with steady hands, ignoring the pain lancing through his battered body. Alarms wailed, the overload armed, a sun caged within steel, waiting to be unleashed. Through the cracked viewport he saw them, the swarm, endless, beautiful in their horror. They did not pause, did not fear, they had never known such things. Until now. Hale leaned forward, voice low, speaking not to the enemy, not to his crew, but to the void itself. "You think we're small, you think we're weak. Maybe we are, but remember this, when humans fall, we do it standing." He pressed the trigger. The forward batteries roared. The overload ignited, fire ripping through the void in a blinding eruption. Alien ships, too close to escape, were torn apart, shredded into burning fragments. The swarm recoiled, pulling back in confusion, in shock. One man, one choice, one sacrifice. The captain watched from the bridge as the light consumed the horizon. His throat closed, his fists clenched, but his eyes never left the fire. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. The crew stood in silence. No cheers, no shouts, only quiet tears and the unspoken vow that Hale's death would not be wasted. The swarm felt it too. Not the loss of their vessels, they were endless. What were 1,000 ships to them but the weight of the act itself? A single human had chosen death, not because it was forced upon him, but because he willed it. Because he believed in something beyond his own survival. The hive mind shuddered. Will was dangerous, choice was dangerous. Sacrifice was something they could not compute. They could not bend it, could not consume it, could not silence it. And now it burned across the stars, brighter than the fire Hale had unleashed. Because sacrifice is contagious. Whispers spread. Survivors of crushed civilizations listened to intercepted fragments, voices speaking of a man who gave himself to buy one more heartbeat of resistance. And in those whispers, courage grew. The captain straightened, wiping blood from his jaw. His voice rang clear across the bridge. They wanted us afraid. Instead, we showed them who we are. We are humanity, and we are not done. The crew answered, voices hoarse, breaking, but unyielding. They roared not like soldiers, but like survivors, like humans. The swarm faltered. For the first time, their advance slowed. Because they had seen it, because they had felt it. Because they now knew the truth. You cannot crush what refuses to die. And though the swarm still outnumbered, though the human vessel still bled, though victory remained a distant dream, the balance had shifted. For every man or woman who fell, 10 more hearts across the galaxy began to stir. And all it had taken was one choice. One sacrifice. One human. The ship groaned like a dying animal. Every panel that had once shone with the precision of human engineering was now warped, melted, or scorched black. Fires licked along the corridors, and the smell of smoke, blood, and ozone filled every breath. And yet the crew moved. Every station was a battlefield, every hand held against impossible odds, every heartbeat was a drum against despair. The captain's voice echoed through the remaining corridors, sharp, ragged, unwavering. Hold them, don't let them take another inch. A young gunner, barely more than a child in human terms, looked out through a cracked viewport. A swarm vessel passed close enough for the heat to scorch the glass. He swallowed hard, trembling, but his finger squeezed the trigger anyway. Fire! The torpedo launched. A bright bloom of light consumed part of the alien ship. It was small, a single dent in an endless sea of metal, but it mattered. The swarm had never been so irritated, never been so distracted. A species that should have begged, that should have vanished, had now become a thorn. A single ship, yet it forced them to maneuver, to retreat slightly, to respond. Inside, the crew felt it, the tension, the exhaustion, but also a strange exhilaration. The humans were losing, yes. They were outnumbered, and yes, but they were alive. They laughed sometimes, sharp, bitter, short bursts of humor that echoed through smoke-filled corridors. Nice view, a technician muttered, wiping blood from his face as the ship shook again. Don't you think they could try a little harder? Another laughed, coughing through dust. They've been trying, we've been stubborn. Guess stubborn wins today. The captain heard it, and for a moment his heart lifted. Human humor, irrational, defiant, beautiful, cut through the fear. Even the swarm noticed. They could not comprehend it. To them, humor was useless. To humans, it was a weapon. The ship shook violently, and for a heartbeat it seemed it might crumble entirely. But then the engineers' hands blistered, eyes bloodshot, systems fried beyond repair, improvised. They rerouted power through circuits that should never have carried it. Sparks flew, arcs of light dancing along corridors, and the ship roared again, engines hissing, weapons firing in a desperate rhythm. Some crew members fell, unable to rise. Others took their place. Every death was felt, every loss a wound that refused to stop burning, but it did not break them. In that agony, the captain spoke to the void again. They think this ends with us. It does not. It never ends like that. Outside the hull, the swarm began to hesitate, not from fear of defeat, but from the strangeness of human resilience. Even as the vessel faltered, even as they lost friends, even as the stars themselves seemed to turn against them, the humans endured. And somewhere beyond the immediate fire and chaos, signals began to flicker. Messages picked up by hidden colonies, fractured transmissions bouncing across sectors, all carrying the same incomprehensible tale. One human ship stands, one human ship fights, one human ship does not yield. Whispers of hope ignited quietly in the shadows. Alien worlds crushed by the swarm, long thought silent, now trembled at the impossible. Perhaps, just perhaps, defiance was contagious. Perhaps one ship could remind an entire galaxy of what had been forgotten. Back on the human vessel, the crew was reaching the edge. Exhaustion clawed at every limb, smoke burned eyes, limbs trembled, and yet they still moved. The navigator, guiding a crippled ship through a hailstorm of alien fire, gritted her teeth. "We can't hold forever." "Forever isn't the point," the captain replied. "Every second we last is a message, every heartbeat is a warning." The crew nodded, not because the captain was a voice of command, they were already beyond obedience. They nodded because the truth was theirs, as human as the blood on their hands. They refused to surrender, even when everything told them to. The swarm's formations began to falter. A single human ship should have been irrelevant. It should have been gone. And yet their persistence, their laughter, their courage, it demanded attention. The hive mind pulsed with unease. A thought they could not consume. This species is different. Their strength is not in numbers or weapons, but in defiance itself. And for the first time, the swarm hesitated. Not fear, not dread, hesitation. Confusion, something no conqueror had felt in. Inside, a small engineer crawled through debris to fix a critical junction. She was bleeding, exhausted, but she worked as if the life of the galaxy depended on it. Perhaps, in some small way, it did. The captain watched her and spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "You're human, you don't know how to quit." She looked up, grimacing through blood and soot. "Nope, not today." And in that small, human moment, the vessel lived again. Out there, across fractured star systems, someone somewhere heard the faint whisper of defiance. They did not know the names of these humans. They did not know what ship or captain had endured, but they understood the message. If they can stand, so can we. The swarm recoiled again, adjusting strategy, unsure how to crush a species that thrived on impossible odds. Their confidence faltered. Their inevitability felt uncertain. And the human crew? They had lost so much, yet they stood taller than ever. Every fire, every scream, every death forged a defiance stronger than any weapon the swarm had unleashed. Because humanity did not measure itself by the number of ships or the strength of armor. It measured itself by courage, by stubbornness, by the unwillingness to bend when the universe demanded it. And right now, in the trembling void, that measurement was everything. The swarm would learn it soon. The galaxy, listening quietly from hidden corners, would learn it even faster. And the human ship, burning, battered, and almost forgotten in the shadow of the destroyers of worlds, would endure. Because humans always do. The human ship was nearly broken. Its hull was a patchwork of scorched steel and temporary repairs. Fires still licked at its edges. Systems that had failed hours ago were barely alive, humming with makeshift circuits and sheer stubborn will. And yet it moved. The captain surveyed the bridge, eyes scanning the battered crew. They were exhausted, bleeding, hollowed by loss, and yet there was fire in their gaze, not fear, not desperation. Fire. They had endured impossible odds. They had faced annihilation and survived. And in that survival, something shifted. "Prepare a full counterstrike," the captain ordered, voice calm but sharp, as though the weight of exhaustion had been replaced by clarity. A murmur ran through the bridge, weapons barely operational, hull failing, engines on the brink of collapse. "Sir," the navigator said cautiously, "we don't have the strength for a strike like that, not against the swarm." "Then we'll make them remember every moment they've wasted thinking they were inevitable," the captain replied. His eyes burned. "We've been standing while they expected us to kneel. Now it's our turn to speak." The crew understood. It wasn't about numbers, strength, or even strategy. It was about defiance. It was about human will etched into every pulse of the ship. Outside, the swarm hesitated, the first real hesitation they had ever felt. Their hive mind flickered in confusion. One species, fragile and laughably small, had endured strikes that should have shattered them. One species had laughed while dying. One species had refused to vanish. And now that species was turning to fight. The first shot fired, not in desperation, but with purpose. A calculated strike aimed to disrupt the alien formation. The ship shuddered under the effort, but the shot hit true, slicing through armor that had never been pierced before. The aliens reeled, their rhythm broken, not by fire, not by death, but by sheer defiance. A species refusing to bow could unbalance even the most disciplined mind. The captain moved through the bridge like a conductor, guiding a symphony of chaos. Every command was precise, measured, intentional. Every crew member responded with a single-minded determination that burned hotter than the fires around them. "They've never seen this before," muttered the young engineer, blood streaked across her face, eyes wide. "They don't know what to do." "Good," the captain said, voice low, almost smiling. "Let them learn, let them fear the impossible." The ship, battered and nearly dead, surged forward, weapons fired in unison. Explosions bloomed across the void. Alien vessels were torn apart, not in mass destruction, but in surgical strikes that cut confidence and control. Every shot carried more than metal, it carried intent. It carried humanity. And somewhere in the darkness of distant sectors, others watched. Star systems long crushed by the swarm's tyranny, planets thought silent, fleets scattered and hiding, heard fragments of transmission. Names of the human ship, the captain, the crew, whispers of impossible resistance. And hope grew. Not hope of survival, that was gone, but hope of defiance, hope that the galaxy could resist, hope that they were not alone. The swarm felt it too, not as logic, not as threat assessment, not as numbers, but as pressure. A weight in their collective consciousness they could not calculate, a tension they could not snap. They had always assumed inevitability was their ally. Now they understood that some things, some beings, could never be made inevitable. Inside the human ship, the crew fought like ghosts and fire intertwined. Every system jury-rigged, every weapon salvaged, every soul pushing beyond the point of endurance. And yet, amidst the chaos, laughter and words of encouragement carried through smoke-choked corridors. "Don't let them win today," the captain whispered. "Not now, not ever." And somehow, against all reason, they didn't. The alien swarm faltered, not defeated, not yet, but forced to pause, forced to reckon, forced to confront a reality they had never known. One human vessel could alter the tide of war. One human vessel could challenge inevitability. One human vessel could remind a galaxy of something long forgotten. Resistance is contagious. And the galaxy was watching. From hidden colonies, refugee ships, shattered empires, flickers of life stirred. Communications long silenced were reawakened. Shadows of fleets hidden in nebulae began to move. The humans had survived, they had fought, and in doing so they had lit a spark in the hearts of millions. The captain stood at the viewport, blood and sweat streaking his face, watching the swarm adjust, reform, and hesitate. His crew, battered, broken, and burning with determination, worked alongside him. He whispered to the stars, to the void, to the enemy themselves. "You wanted us gone, we remain. You wanted fear, we give you courage. You wanted inevitability, we give you defiance. And if the galaxy remembers nothing else, it will remember this." And for the first time, the swarm knew that victory would not come easily. That defeating humans was no longer a question of strength. It was a question of will. And humanity, will was infinite. The void was endless. The swarm loomed like a tide without end, their ships stretching across the darkness of space, a million points of burning intent. Yet in the heart of that storm, one human vessel stood, battered, barely alive, and unyielding. Inside, the crew moved with quiet precision, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces, every scar, every singed uniform. Fires raged unchecked around them. Systems failed and flared like dying stars, but no one faltered. The captain's eyes met each member of his crew in turn, and in those eyes he saw what no alien could understand. Courage that refused to bend, defiance that refused to die. "They think this ends with us," he said, voice calm, steady, a whisper that carried across the burning decks. "But it does not. We are more than steel and fire. We are human, and we endure." A young gunner, face streaked with soot, grinned despite trembling limbs. "Endure, huh? Let's make it hurt then." Laughter rippled through the bridge, a spark of life in the shadow of annihilation. Outside, the swarm pressed closer. Their energy weapons tore through the vacuum, aiming to obliterate, to erase. Yet every strike was met with fire, with cunning, with sheer, stubborn human will. The ship maneuvered like a wounded animal, engines screaming, shields failing, yet always alive. And in that persistence, something remarkable happened. Signals long thought dead flared to life across distant sectors. Colonies crushed, fleets scattered, civilizations silenced. They listened. They transmitted, they whispered, they rose. A spark had become a blaze. The galaxy remembered defiance. The swarm, sensing this ripple of resistance, faltered. Their hive mind pulsed with confusion, the first true uncertainty it had ever known. One vessel should have been irrelevant, it should have been dust. Yet it endured, and with it hope spread faster than fire across dry brush. The captain surveyed the battlefield from the bridge. His hands were blistered, his uniform torn, his face bloodied. He could feel the weight of every loss, every life gone to protect a dream no alien mind could comprehend. But he did not waver. "Full counter-strike," he ordered, voice rising. "Not just to survive, strike to show them what humanity means, strike to make the galaxy remember." Weapons fired, beams of energy, missiles, and kinetic rounds pierced the swarm. Explosions bloomed in the darkness. Alien vessels shattered. The tide of inevitability cracked. The humans were dying, yes. They were bleeding, yes. They were small, finite, fragile. Yet with each passing moment, their defiance grew louder, carried across the void in signals, in light, in the will that no weapon could destroy. And then a transmission reached the distant corners of the galaxy, faint but clear. One human ship had endured. One human ship had faced the destroyers of worlds and lived. Not victorious, but unbroken. And in that message, every hidden fleet, every crushed colony, every hidden survivor understood the truth. The swarm was not invincible. The captain turned to his crew. Exhaustion weighed on them like stone, yet in their eyes burned the same unquenchable fire. "Whatever happens," he said, voice low, "remember who we are, remember what we've done. And if we fall, let them remember our defiance." They nodded, every one of them. Not with despair, but with pride, with the knowledge that humanity had carved its place into the stars. The final volleys rang out. The human ship, small and battered, struck again. Alien vessels faltered. Systems began to fail in the swarm, not from loss of weapons, but from the tremor in their collective mind. Uncertainty, fear, hesitation. And then the galaxy responded. Hidden fleets moved. Colonies fired. Planets' long, silent broadcast warnings, signals, and calls to arms. One vessel could not stop the swarm, but one vessel had reminded the galaxy that resistance was possible. And sometimes that is enough. The captain watched the chaos unfold, knowing the human ship would not survive much longer. Engines sputtered, weapons went silent, the hull groaned its final lament. Yet no fear, no regret, only defiance shining brighter than any star. He whispered to the void, "We may fall, but we will never break. You will remember humanity, you will remember defiance, and if nothing else, you will remember us." The ship took one final, shuddering breath. Fires consumed the outer hull and the humans braced. Yet even in that moment of finality, a legacy was born. The swarm recoiled. The galaxy watched. And humanity endured, not in body, but in spirit, in hope, in the knowledge that defiance is contagious and courage eternal. Somewhere across the stars, children born in secret colonies would hear the story. Survivors of crushed worlds would whisper it in hiding. Generations yet to come would remember the name of the human ship, the captain, and every crew member who refused to yield. Because to be human is not to conquer every foe. It is not to survive every battle. It is to stand when all odds say to fall. To fight when no one else will. To laugh, to love, to die with defiance in your heart. And in that defiance, the universe itself bends, not because it must, but because it cannot ignore humanity. The swarm would retreat, not fully defeated, not fully gone, but shaken, uncertain, aware for the first time that there exists a species that cannot be crushed without consequence. And humanity would rise again. Because one ship had stood, and in doing so, had reminded the galaxy of a truth older than stars. You can break us, you can wound us, you can even kill us, but you cannot stop the human spirit. And in that truth, hope burned brighter than any fire, louder than any explosion, and more enduring than the stars themselves.